it is time to talk about everything that we read in March, and I have 14 books to talk to you about. And we also never spoke about the things I read in February, so there's extra books at the end of the video. Let's get into it. First up is Deathless. You will most likely be seeing this on my top 10 books of the year because I loved this so much. And since then, I have been trying to get my hands on absolutely everything that this author has written. She is fast becoming one of my favorite authors. When I read this in the vlog, I didn't realize that I had already read a book by this author. I said, I've never heard of this author before, and I was completely wrong because Comfort Me With Apples is a horror book that I greatly enjoyed, and this one, also fantastic. This is a dark fantasy, historical fantasy. It is set both in this magical world because our main character is becomes the wife of Koschei the Deathless, which is this like demonic villain character in Russian folklore. I absolutely love the way that the story is told because we're in this magical world, but we're also in Stalingrad, Leningrad, experiencing the war that is going on, and the siege of this city is one of the most heartbreaking depictions of war that I have ever experienced. I gushed about this for so long in my vlog, so if you haven't seen that, I will link it up there and in the description, but this is just one of the best written things that I have ever read. I thought it dragged just ever so slightly in the middle, but otherwise I was just completely enraptured, enthralled in the writing quality of this, in the story that this took. I love a retelling, and this was just so good because it felt like the retelling had something to say. It had something that was different from this original story. It's painting Koschei in a bit of a better light, but also still showing this incredibly toxic relationship that Maria Marevna, our main character, and Koschei have. We're also just very much in a fairy tale. It feels like a fairy tale. It's written like a fairy tale. I could gush about this book absolutely all day, so I'm gonna shut up now, but I just loved this. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. Next up is The House Witch, which I unfortunately did not love, and I'm really bummed that I didn't love this because I had such high hopes for this book. I don't really want to talk about it too much because I did not enjoy it. I believe I gave this 2 or 2.5 stars at the end of the day, but it was not for me. We are following this house witch. He is kind of like under the radar as a witch. He doesn't want people to know. He's working in the kitchens. He's cooking all of this fantastic food. We're also learning about all of this court intrigue. I just felt like it really dragged on for me. The humor in this was also not for me. I've been told that this series does get better. I don't know if I'll be continuing in it. A lot of you guys absolutely love this, so don't let me dissuade you from picking it up. It just unfortunately was not for me. Next up is Lexicon. This really took me by surprise. I'd heard nothing about this. I read it for a video. One of you convinced me to read it, and I loved it. I loved it so much. It very much does give like that action movie that your dad always wanted to watch growing up, and there was a new one out like every other week. It is entertaining. It is slightly annoying. The amount of times that the bathroom is mentioned in here, too many times. That doesn't need to be in here. But the conversations about language, which is why this is recommended to me, were absolutely incredible. We have this like underground society of poets, and they are very much concerned with manipulation and the power of words. And so we have this word that can kill, and that's kind of what we're on the hunt for throughout this book. And we're following different characters who are all connected in some way that we don't find out until later in the book. I thought it was surprising. I thought it was twisty and turny. It was a fantastic thriller. It also really scratched the part of my brain that loves being incredibly esoteric about language. I loved it so much. Next up, I read The Paris Apartment. I read this in my 24-hour readathon, as will the next like 7 books that we're gonna cover. I borrowed this from my friend, so I've already returned it to her, but I'll put a little picture here. This is a Lucy Foley book. This is my second Lucy Foley. The first one I read was The Guest List, and I really liked that. So when my friend mentioned that she had a copy of this, I was really happy to pick it up. It was perfect for a 24-hour readathon. It's a great thriller. It's super fast paced. We're following this young woman, our main character. She's going to visit her brother in Paris. He has this apartment, and when she shows up, he's not there, and she's trying to figure out where he's gone. And so she's talking to all the people who live in this apartment complex. They all have this like weird connection to each other that we find out. It's a reveal later in the book, and we are trying to figure out what's going on. Her brother was this journalist, so we're trying to figure out if he was working on a story that got him in some trouble or if there's something else going on. And our main character doesn't want to go to the police because she's got a past that she's trying to deal with. So she enlists the help of some people who may or may not be trustworthy, and it was a really fun time. I really enjoyed it. Would recommend if you're looking for a thriller. And then I picked up The Silent Patient, and this book was a wild ride. I feel like everybody loves this book. Everybody loves the twist. Anytime everybody loves a book, I'm convinced I'm gonna hate it because I'm an Aquarius and I have to be anti, but I'm not gonna say I enjoyed the experience of reading the book because I hated every single character in here, and I'm never going to tell you that this is like the best book of all time. But the twist was interesting. It was fun. I enjoyed theorizing about it before it happened. It made sense. I called the twist like a page or two before it happened, and I think it really made sense for the book. Like, it wasn't out of left field where it was the most shocking, crazy thing that ever happened. Because sometimes when that happens, like, I'm upset because there's no way that I would have figured that out. This is a twist that you could figure out. I enjoyed the book. I hated all of the characters in the book, but again, I was entertained. I was surprised. What more do you want from a thriller? Then I found one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. This is Lightfall. This is The Girl in the Galdurian, which is volume 1. I love this so much. Let me show you how absolutely stunning the artwork is in here. Let me find a page that's not like gonna spoil anything. How cute is that? I love that so much. This is the story of this young girl. Her grandfather is like old, he forgets things. She's like out doing something for him one day, and she finds this guy, this Galdurian, this old race of people who has been thought to be extinct, but she finds this guy and he's looking for her grandfather as well. And so she brings him back, and her grandfather is nowhere to be found. So now they have to go find the pig wizard, who is her grandfather, and they go on this quest together, and they're very unlikely companions. Our Galdurian is very much like a puppy dog golden retriever type. He's just like so excited to be adventuring and out in the world on a quest, and our main character is very anxious and very stressed about things. I just think the mastery of this art form in here is just the use of color, the use of language, the way that this story is told is just so high caliber. The art form of this is just so well executed, and I loved every single aspect of this series, and I cannot wait to pick up the second one. We are back with a fresh memory card to talk about What Feasts at Night. This is the sequel to What Moves the Dead. T. Kim Fisher is my favorite author, and I have not been loving her shorter stuff. I want more longer books, and I hope her second release of 2024, I hope that one is a win for me, because not that this wasn't a win. I did enjoy it, but I've just been craving more from T. Kim Fisher, and I think I only get that in her longer work, and I'm really hoping that because this is a longer book that I will get that T. Kim Fisher flavor that I have been missing since The Hollow Places and The Twisted Ones. But let's talk about What Feasts at Night. So this is the sequel to What Moves the Dead. This was a Fall of the House of Usher retelling. We were introduced to our main character, who is a sworn soldier, and we are following that main character again in this book. Our mycologists, our mushroom gal from book 1 is back in this one, and we are kind of following our main character Alex Easton as they uncover a new spooky thing that's happening at this village that they are at. The scary thing in here is a woman, a moth that turns into a woman, hence the beautiful end papers, that sits on your chest as you sleep at night and steals your breath, and it is horrifying. I did not want to go to sleep after reading this book, but I felt like I wanted to be in the horror for longer. I felt like we had this great gothic lead up to the horror, and then we weren't sitting in it for long enough, and I really wanted to sit in that scariness for longer. I think T. Kim Fisher is fantastic at horror, and I just want more of it from her. So my only complaint is I wanted more spooky for longer in this book. Next up is Mary, and this was scary all the way through. Absolutely horrifying from page 1 to the last page. It got truly slashery. It was an absolutely wild ride. Our main character is going through menopause, and doctors are not taking her seriously, and she also is having these flashbacks and hearing voices from this like serial killer who was in this town a long time ago. And the cover, you can see there's like an extra hand in the bathtub. Absolutely horrifying. This book made me not want to look in mirrors for a long time. I had a 1-2 punch with the sleeping in the mirrors. Going to the bathroom at night was rough for me, because every single time our main character looks at herself in the mirror or looks at the faces of women who are about her age, she watches their faces like decompose, and it's disgusting and very detailed. There is a very gruesome animal death in here, here, so if that's something you're sensitive about, I would not read this one because it is quite gross. But I did have such a good time with the horror of it all, and I love a big floppy paperback. It made my heart very happy. Then we read Heartstopper Volume 5, which is the last one that is currently out. I believe this is gonna have one more volume and then it's gonna be over. Heartstopper is gonna be over. I'll be very sad when it ends. We're following our main characters, Nick and Charlie. They're in love, and we are following them as they try to figure out what's next for them. So one of these boys is older than the other, so they're trying to figure out what happens when they go to university and how to navigate that, and also how to navigate like taking their relationship to the next level physically and if they're ready for that, and all of those great conversations. I love this series, and this book was no change to that love. I had a really good time reading this. Then I read Fina, and this was the last book I read for the 24-hour readathon, and I was burnt out. I was done. I did not want to look at a book at this point. So maybe I did this book a bit of a disservice, but I don't know. I don't feel like I got everything out of it that I needed to. We are following these characters. They've just broken up. And so our main character, she has her ex-partner, and they're both going on this adventure to try to save someone's grandmother because a wormhole has opened up in the IKEA-like store that they work at. They need to go take this device that's supposed to help guide them to the grandmother through all of these different dimensions, and it's very silly and very absurd and very much full of commentary, and it was also very heartwarming. I enjoyed it. I just could not put any more information into my brain at this point, so I don't really have any more intelligent things to say about it. I've also been on a cozy fantasy kick, so I read The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a ship of her own making, and I loved it. I love Kat Valente. After I read Deathless, I said, give me more. Give me everything this author has ever written. This one very much feels like a cozy fantasy. It really feels like a fairy tale. The green wind is the thing that comes and takes our main character to Fairyland, and she goes on all of these different adventures. It's very fae in the way that the fairies are, because there are these rules and quests and things that are going on, and you can't really trust anybody, and she picks up some animal companions and some creature companions along the way as well, one of whom is a Wiviary. Wiviary? I can't, this word. It's a wyvern and a library combined, and this wyvern library little creature is just the cutest thing, and he's like a portion of the alphabet, and so he knows everything about this portion of the alphabet, but don't ask him about other things in the alphabet. It's just very silly and tongue-in-cheek, and this book kind of feels like if you took Neil Gaiman's cozy fantasy and T. Kingfisher's cozy fantasy and just mushed them together. That's who Kat Valente is as a cozy fantasy writer, in my opinion. Absolutely loved this one. It was so nice to follow our main character as we kind of embarked on this journey with her. It was talking about the importance of time, what it means to lose your heart, your relationship with your parents. It was just a really well-rounded book. It had a lot to say, and I really enjoyed the message of it all. Then I read A Natural History of Dragons. I was expecting this to be cozy fantasy. I don't think it is cozy fantasy. Something happened in this book that I would not expect to happen in a cozy fantasy book, and it really took me off guard. I think I recommend a lot of books as cozy fantasy and promote a lot of books as cozy fantasy that other people would not find cozy, like The Graveyard Book, like The Ocean at the End of the Lane. People think that that is not cozy fantasy. You're obviously entitled to your own opinion. Those books feel cozy to me, but something happened in this book that is not cozy to me. And you can look up the content warnings if you want to find out what that is. But I do think that this structure of this book feels cozy, but the actual content of the book is not, if that makes sense. Because this is set up as a memoir of Lady Trent, who is our main character. She's writing down her memoir later in life, so she references herself being an elderly lady. And in the story that she's telling, she's 19. So we're following her as she meets her husband and gets married and goes on this expedition to find these dragons. She was obsessed with dragons as a child, trying to navigate this world in which she's not really allowed to be educated because then the men won't want to marry her, and like all of these tricky things for someone to navigate. It really feels real, if that makes sense. Like, I firmly believe that if there was another universe in which dragons existed, this memoir would exist from Victorian England with dragons. Like, it was very much of the time of Victorian England, just if there were dragons in Victorian England. It just, I don't know, it just had that vibe of being Victorian England. I don't really know how to explain that to you. I think the author did a really fantastic job of depicting a 19-year-old accurately, a child accurately, and also depicting like this older lady who's recounting the story of her 19-year-old self. I thought that was all done super authentically, which I think can be a difficult thing to do. So the execution of this was fantastic. I really enjoyed the story. I constantly wanted to find out this mystery about these dragons, and I had theories and I wanted to know what was going on, and I was really committed to this story with our main character. And I really hope that this becomes a longer series because I would definitely pick up more. So devastated by the thing that happens at the end of this book. I was not expecting it at all, and that makes it really not cozy for me, but I probably will mention this in cozy fantasy recommendation videos because I think if you're looking for that, I'm reading a diary of a person who very much could be from our world, but just if there were fantasy elements to it. If that's what you like out of cozy fantasy, I think you could really like this, but it does not give cozy vibes. Besides the fact that you know that our main character at least is going to be okay because we're learning from her as an older lady. So we know that she's survived this whole experience and has gotten out of it okay. Next, I read The Cybernetic Tea Shop, which is a cozy sci-fi, and I was shocked at how much I loved this. Obviously, I picked it up wanting to love it. People have been talking about this book a lot in cozy fantasy circles, but I wasn't sure that I could get a full meaty story out of a book that is this short. This is only 112 pages. The font size is quite large. I wasn't expecting for this to have such an impact in the small amount of pages, and it really did, which is super, super impressive that Meredith Katz was able to do that. So we are following our two main characters. One is an AI repair technician, and they are kind of bouncing around. They move a lot. We're following them and really getting to know them. We're also getting to know this AI, which in this world, we have these things called raises. They are like basically like a pet AI kind of thing. They're AI, but they're not like a true AI sentient. Whereas we also had in this world these robots, which were like true sentient AI. And then there were a lot of like ethical questions, moral questions, and they ended up getting outlawed. But obviously the ones that still exist are still allowed to exist because they're sentient. So we have this AI that's almost 300 years old that works in this tea shop, and their like old owner, master person who like purchased them has since died. It was her dream to have this tea shop last 300 years, but that's what the AI is trying to do because they really loved this shop owner. Anyways, our two main characters meet and we get to see how their relationship impacts each other. They don't meet until the second half of the book, and I was like, wow, how are we gonna get a satisfying conclusion to this story in 50 pages? It really gave me what I wanted and more. Like there were stakes in here, there was conflict. I really felt like I knew both of our characters. I really felt like I knew the impact that they were having on each other. I thought this was just so well done. Definitely a 5-star read. And the last thing I read in March before we recap February is The Oris and the Orphans. Again, on a cozy fantasy binge here. This is Kelly Barnhill's book. I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon a while ago and really loved it and have been wanting to pick this up ever since. So I got the audiobook from my library, which was lovely. This is kind of a very similar story to The Girl Who Drank the Moon. So I think if you liked The Girl Who Drank the Moon, you will like this one as well. The structure is very similar because in The Girl Who Drank the Moon, you have the witch who's kind of living outside of the village. There's something going on in the village. Things are not what they seem. And the townspeople have this misconception of the witch. And that's kind of also what's happening in this book. We have this ogress who's living outside of the village who is trying to do all of these really nice things for these townspeople, and the townspeople are not appreciative of that fact, and the town is very much not community focused and is struggling a lot, and there's something going on with the mayor. We also have these orphans that we're following who are, growing up. They're experiencing a lot of joy, but also a lot of struggle as they don't have enough money to feed themselves and house themselves and get that upbringing that they need. So we are following all of these characters. Obviously they end up interacting. I really love this book, but I feel like it did not need to be 400 pages. It dragged on a little bit. The audiobook was like 13 hours. I felt like all of the plot points were valid and needed to be in there, but I felt like a lot of them could have happened faster. Like things that took a chapter could have taken a page. Things that took a couple pages could have been a paragraph. I think it would have been much more enjoyable if it had been shortened a little bit. But again, I liked all the plot points. I just wanted them to happen a little bit quicker. Didn't feel like we needed to spend so much time explaining what was happening with all of them. But overall, I did really enjoy this and I gave it 4 stars. Okay, because I didn't do a wrap up in February, I just want to quickly wrap up the 4 things I read in February. It was not a lot of things. Most of them I covered in videos already. So I read The Grip of It, which is a haunted house story. I love haunted house stories. This one was good. I really liked the things that we had to say about relationships and communicating versus not communicating. We were in both of these people's heads. So this couple, this man and this woman, they're married. The guy has this gambling addiction, so they've decided to move out of the city and start over. And they move into this house that is super cheap. Obviously it's haunted, and they start to experience things and lose trust in each other. And it feels like this commentary on trust in a relationship and communication and how important that is and what happens when we lose that trust and lose that communication. And I did enjoy it. I thought it was a good haunted house book. It wasn't my favorite haunted house book that I have ever read, but I did really enjoy it. Then I read Mislead in Parts Half Known, which is the 9th book in the We Were Children series. I love this series. This book was not my favorite that I have ever read. I felt like it was a lot of things that needed to be furthered in order to get to the next book, if that makes sense. I feel like in a novella series, it can be difficult to have that exposition and that character growth that takes longer to happen because the stories need to be contained in a smaller amount of pages. And I felt like this book was very much us just trying to get through all of the character development for a lot of these characters so that we could set up the things that were going to be happening in the next books. But I still enjoyed it. I'm still going to be continuing in the series. Then I read A Little Devil in America, which was 5 stars. I loved this so much. This is by Hani Fedorikib. This book is a work of art. This has some of my favorite essays in it that I have ever read, and the language in here is just absolutely exceptional. Let me see if I can find something. This is one paragraph from a larger passage about grief. Once I had a conversation with a poet who had also lost their mother. As we charted out our shared grief, the poet told me something they had learned from another poet. Well, we have 2 mothers, they began to tell me. The one we keep with us in our hearts and the corpse we can't put down. There is the putting down of the metaphorical corpse, and then there is the carrying of the physical, but the hesitation to part with both comes from a similar place. A mother who has lost a child carries with her not only the corpse of the child, but the potential for what that life could have been. I mourn both the actual body and the potential for the whole person it held. How much better my time in the world could have been spent with all of the once loving people I've loved still here. The way that Hani Fedorikib writes is fantastic. You can really tell that this author is a poet. You can tell that they have such an incredible grasp of language, and I love essay collections written by poets. They are always fantastic, and I can't wait to pick up more from this author in the future. I was so busy gushing about this, I forgot to tell you what the whole premise of this is. Let me read you the back. I was a devil in other countries, and I was a little devil in America too. Inspired by these words spoken by Josephine Baker at the 1963 March on Washington, Hani Fedorikib has written a profound reflection on how Black performance is inextricably woven into the fabric of American culture. This book is fantastic. I highly recommend all of you read it. And the last thing I read before my battery dies is How to Protect Bookstores and Why: The Present and Future of Bookselling by Danny Kane. This is something that I got as part of the influencer program from Libro FM, so it was an ARC that I was sent, so thank you to Libro FM for that. Honestly, I read this because I needed an audiobook and I didn't have anything else on deck. It was interesting. I enjoyed reading it. It was talking about how we can support booksellers, the struggles that booksellers face. It's my dream one day to open a bookstore, so I think this was good information for me to have. Also great information for me to have as a consumer as to how I can support bookstores and booksellers and why Amazon is so bad. This is the author of How to Resist Amazon and Why, and they also co-own a bookstore in Lawrence, Kansas. So this was a really interesting look into our author's view of bookselling and the things that they have learned, and also the things that our author learned when interviewing a lot of different bookstores. So it was fun to kind of go be in all of these different bookstores and find out what their struggles were and what they're dealing with and how they are able to continue being booksellers and have their bookstores thrive. Not the most interesting nor entertaining nonfiction that I have read, but I think an important read that I did get a lot out of. And that is it. That is everything that we have read over the past 2 months. Thank you for sticking with me for what is a very long video. I really appreciate you being here. Let me know what you've been reading these past 2 months. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I chatted about today, if you liked them, if you didn't like them, if our opinions are the same or different. Let's chat about it in the comments. I will see you guys next Friday with another video.